Hi, today I'm going to talk about how many types of communications that do exist in the project management domain, because the project management body of knowledge, which is considered one of the most esteemed standard and is being adopted by a wide variety of project managers and a large cluster of organizations around the globe. So the project management body of knowledge actually categorizes the communications into 8 distinctive types. And in this video, I'm going to discuss each communication in its profound details. So after watching this video, you'll have a better understanding about these communication types and what are the fundamental differences between them. So without any delay, let's just get started. And one more thing, do subscribe the channel. Communication is considered the paramount in project management. So communication's significance is massive in project management as it is in the general life. So communication is also a bare bone essential of the project management, the cornerstones of the project management. So being a project manager, most of the time he or she spends in communicating with his team, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, third party vendors, business executives, end users. So all these stakeholders the project manager is interacting with, he is actually communicating. So 80% of the time the project manager job is around communicating and bringing the stakeholders around the common goal. So one very important aspect of the project manager role is actually he is acting as a liaison between the team and the external stakeholders, because the external stakeholders, they are giving the project manager as a high level requirements, and then the project manager is actually collecting those requirements and then it's showing those requirements to his team, translating them and interpreting them in a way that the team can actually understand those high level requirements, and based on those requirements the team can actually go and build the product as it is being desired by these stakeholders. The most important role of the project manager in terms of communication is to actually bridge the gap that do exist in terms of cultural aspects, because the project manager is working with geographically distributed teams, those teams which are distributed among different geographies with different cultural norms, different aspects, different talents, different languages. So the project manager must communicate with these teams, because each team is having a different skill set, different background, different norms, and most importantly different culture. So the project manager is the common entity between these teams. So his role is actually communicate in a sense that all the teams, they work as a one cohesive team and their interests are aligned to one common goal of the project, and that cannot be done until and unless the project manager is intended to fill this gap. And then another area where the project manager expertise is required in terms of communication is the various expertise level, because the teams he is dealing with is having different sets of capability. So the project manager job is to actually increase the capability of his teams as well, and how he can actually do the capability increment is by communicating with them and understanding with them that what kind of a capability do they need. So after understanding that capability, then the project manager can actually arrange trainings, so those trainings can ultimately help these teams in developing their skill set as well. And then the most and crucial aspect of the project management is conflicting viewpoints, which means that once you're working with virtual teams, the project manager is most of the time come across the situation that most of the team members are having different viewpoints that are conflicting with each other. So the project manager's job is to actually first understand what exactly their viewpoint is and then try to bring them around the common goal. And this cannot be done until unless the project manager is communicating with his teams on an ongoing basis. So communication is very, very important in terms of resolving the conflicts as well, because if the project manager is not communicative, he'll having a difficulties in managing and resolving the conflicts. And then once you're working in a project, all stakeholders are having different interests. So the project manager job is to actually communicate with each stakeholder and bring them around the common interest and the common goals of the project. And this again cannot be done until unless the project manager is in communication with those stakeholders. So with this, you can again realize what is the significance and importance of communication in project management. As I have introduced in the beginning, that the project management body of knowledge has actually categorized the communications into 8 distinctive types. So it's time to unfold each type of communication. So let's try and find out what's the first communication in that series. So the first communication in that series is the internal communication. So the internal communication is actually occurring when the project manager is actually communicating with his team. So this means that this is type of a communication where the project manager is actually interacting with his team. So this is purely internal, and this is why we refer to this type of communication as an internal communication. So in internal communication, it may be that the project manager is actually interacting with his team, or it could be a subset of his team, or it could be one or two individual that belongs to that team. So all of these are actually the manifestations of internal communication, because there is no external stakeholder or external vendor is involved. So the communication is solely happening between the project manager and his internal team. So that's why this is internal communication, and that's the first type of communication of that series. The next type of communication into that series is known as the external communication. Unlike the internal communication, this is the time when the project manager is actually interacting with external stakeholders, customers, vendors, other team members. It might be a third party vendors as well, or if the project is government scale project, so the project manager is probably interacting with the public at large. So this could be one manifestation of the project that actually belongs to a governmental project. So this is the time when the project manager is not actually interacting internally, but rather interacting externally with all these stakeholders. And the sole purpose of this communication is to actually get all the requirements and feedbacks from the external stakeholders, so that the project manager can understand fully about the product he's going to develop with his team. So once he'll actually take inputs from these stakeholders and feedbacks, then he'll come back to his team and make a communication about these requirements, so the team can actually understand those high level versions of requirements from these stakeholders, and they can actually understand and focus on the work they are going to build upon at the end of this project. So this is an external communication. So I'm really hoping that you have a better understanding now between the internal communication and the external communication. According to the project management body of knowledge, the third type of communication in project management is known as formal communication. Now this is type of a communication when the project manager or the senior entity in the project manager, it could be sponsor, external stakeholder, it could be anybody. It's most of the time project manager who's actually presenting with high level of professionalism after significant preparation, because this is a formal communication. And in formal communication, the project manager needs to be ready and prepared, because this is the final and the formal version of the project you're embarked upon. So after making significant preparations, the project manager is communicating with either the stakeholders or any entity where the project manager is actually going to communicate. And for this, the project manager needs to be seriously ready and prepared, because this is something he's formally making upon a statement about it. So this is considered as the formal communication and project management. So the potential example of this communication could be reports, it could be meeting minutes once the project manager has actually conducted a meeting with external stakeholders or sponsors and made an official position. So the project manager needs to be ready and need to communicate this information to his team as well. So meeting minutes could be a good example of this communication. And then briefing and status presentations is one of very important and understandable communication that belongs to the formal communication. The fourth communication type of that series is actually the opposite of formal communication, and this is known as informal communication. And it usually happens when typically the project manager is conducting all the communication in just flow of the project. So these communications are mostly spontaneous, so they are not like formal communication where you need a proper preparation before you're actually interacting or communicating with stakeholders or other teams as well. But this is just more of a spontaneous discussion you usually do with team. It can be done with stakeholders as well, but with this you do not actually need any sort of preparation. So this is totally informal. But the most important examples of this communication could be emails, it could be a chat windows that you are frequently doing with your team, stakeholders, end users, but not part of as a formal communication, but informal spontaneous communication. So most of this communications also occurs at an occasion when you are actually exchanging or enjoying a cup of tea with your project with your team. These communications are also known as water cooler discussions, because upon an occasion of cup of a tea, the project manager and the team is interacting with each other informally, and that's the best example of the informal communication. The fifth and the most important communication the project management body of knowledge has defined is the vertical communication. And the vertical communication is a type of communication that is happening between the superiors and their subordinates, which means that the flow of communication is from top to bottom, and that makes it a vertical communication. Because in vertical communication, actually the superiors are actually giving directives to their subordinates. So that's the reason it is known as a vertical communication. So it could be another manifestation of vertical communication is when the project manager is actually talking and interacting with this team as well. Because if there is a directive that the project manager is actually going to give to his team, so that this kind of communication will considered as a vertical communication, because this time the project manager is not just interacting, but rather he is giving a directive to his team. So information flow is coming from top to bottom. So the project manager is getting a directive from the upper management, and now the project manager is giving that directive to his teams as well. And this is how the communication is flowing from top to bottom, and that makes it a vertical communication. So one possible example of vertical communication is usually status reports and directives and other requests that is flowing from top management to the bottom. Let's move forward and try and see what the sixth communication type is. And the sixth communication type I'm going to unfold is unlike vertical communication, but it's opposite, which is horizontal communication. So this is type of a communication that is not happening between the top tiers and the subordinates, but rather on an horizontal level. So instance of communication when the communication is happening across across the peers. So which means that once the team is actually interacting with each other, so that is making it horizontal, because now the peers are exchanging information with each other, and that makes it an horizontal communication. So the horizontal communication often includes the discussion that is around project technical and conceptual details, which means that this communication is mostly held when the team is actually discussing about the approach they are going to adopt in order to achieve their final product, or the project they are going to embark upon. So this discussion is around that approach most of the time, that makes it a horizontal communication. And that's the sixth type of communication the project management body of knowledge specifies and defines. These seven type of communication the project management body of knowledge has defined is the most crucial communication among all the communications, and is known as an official communication, because this is the communication that can be treated as a matter of fact of representation of actual position, because this is the communication the project manager is doing, where he is actually representing the actual position about the project. So this is the communication that is not happening on a horizontal level or at the vertical level, or it is not an informal communication where the project manager is just making flow of the project a spontaneous discussion, but rather this is the time the project manager is actually representing an official situation about the project. So the potential examples of this communication is quarterly and annual reports, in which the project manager is actually taking an exact and actual position about the project progress so far they have made with his team. And there could be published releases where the top management, the organization is actually producing all the information that can be considered as official. So that is something which makes it an official communication, and that's the seventh type of communication as the project management body of knowledge defines and suggests. The eighth and the last communication of that series the project management body of knowledge specifies is the unofficial communication. So this is the communication where the project manager is not actually taking an actual position, but rather this is actually an off the record discussion the project manager is making. So this is a communication where the project manager is actually interacting with his team based on the hypothetical ideas and the kind of scenarios and assumptions the project is going to undertake. So this is again off the record discussion, because this is not being recorded in any document of that project. So the project manager and the team among themselves are making this communication, and this is just off the record, which means that this is again not onto the radar of project management documents. That makes it an unofficial communication, because this is not the point where the project manager is taking any actual positions, but rather just a friendly discussions about the assumptions and the constraints the project may undertake. That makes it an unofficial communication, and that's the eighth and the last communication type of that series. So with this, we have now reached to the end of this video, and I'm really hoping that you like my content around the project management communication types. So if you like this video, please subscribe my channel and hit the bell icon, and share your feedback as well. What do you think about the communication types, and most importantly, what is your perspective of communication types that do exist in the project management? So I'll be eagerly waiting for your feedback to come in. So put your queries in the comment section area, and I'll definitely come back to you with the best of my knowledge. Till the next video, bye bye.